Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSet Live Lectures. Dear friends, as you know that in philosophy, we have started a series on philosophy of mind, and today we are conducting yet another lecture in the same series. In today's lecture, we will be talking about Eliminative Physicalism. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert, Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, JNU. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, Sir.
Thank you, Amrit. So hello viewers, as you're already aware, we have been talking about different themes under the ages of different themes that are studied in the domain of philosophy of mind, and we have already discussed what exactly is the core problematic that we take into consideration when we talk about philosophy of mind. So to do a quick recapitulation, we would remember that the main problem that we discussed, the main issue that we discussed in philosophy of mind is about the nature of mental states, and also very importantly, since there is a physical part of our experiences, in the sense that all experiences do occur in our body, they are associated with, they have a location. And in a certain sense, they have a physical location too. I mean, even if it's very broad at times, if we have pain, we may not, at times, even our whole body may be aching. But still, since, whatever experiences we may be talking about, since those experiences are occurring inside a person, and a person has a body, so these experiences, despite being non-physical, abstract in nature, because physically, we cannot show them. There is like very difficult to have a very physical kind of a calculation of them. So, given their non-physical nature, one of the problems that forms the core of philosophy of mind is how do we account for these mental occurrences, these mental states, which seem to have some type of location in our physical body, or which in some way or the other, directly, indirectly, but ineluctably seem to be in some sense related to the physical part of us. So that being the case, as we've already discussed in our very early lectures, there could be two ways: either to reduce the physicalist part of the equation to the abstract part, to the so we could say that there's nothing physical at all. As a matter of fact, what we call physical is available to us only through senses, and therefore we are aware of what we call physical only in terms of its phenomenal appearance. And so far as that is the case, we know what we call the physical part of the world only through our ideas, only rather in terms of our ideas, and beyond those ideas, what is there, we don't know. So since everything becomes available to us in terms of experience, and experience is all that we have, and that defines us in a certain way, because what we call consciousness is basically nothing but the experiences that come to us, that occur to us. So one way is to reduce the entire physical part of so to speak, our world to ideas, and then do away with any talk of the physical at all. But this since it doesn't offer us much in terms of research programs as such, And moreover, especially after the dominant influence of scientific method, scientific way of looking at things, we want empirical evidence for things, and that being the case, physicalism is a more kind of debated theory, more of an accepted theory in philosophy of mind in comparison to their idealist counterpart. So that being the case, we have already looked at different kind of ideas, different theories that have been proposed from the point of view of physicalism, and under that we have already looked at behaviorism, which wants to a kind of a theory which wants to do away with any talk of, so to speak, mental events at all. So they want to view mind in terms of our behavior. So they would rather say that, since we cannot have any empirical evidence, a third person, sort of demonstrable empirical evidence to show what goes on inside one's mind, but the behavior of a person is available, for us to study. So therefore, when we talk about mind, basically what we are doing is we are talking about the manifest part of it, which is behavior. So we can study mind basically in terms of behavior. So they want to do away with let's not use the word deny, but they want to only look at the manifest part of, so to speak, the mental events like pain and so on. And then after that, we have brain mind identity theorists who propose that we could possibly have, or would have better technology available to us to look into a person's brain. And we know that when certain experiences occur, and when the brain states associated with those mental events are mapped and taken into consideration, certain similarities are often seen, and therefore we could have a kind of we can map mental events. We can have a view of them in terms of brain states. So we should talk about mental events as a certain kind of physical occurrences in the brain, certain kind of firings in the brain. But then that program also runs into troubled water. And then we find the emergence of functionalism. But an important point to be seen in all these theories which we have been discussing under physicalism is that they don't say that mental events don't exist at all. They want to explain them, and therefore they take the idea of mental events with certain kind of seriousness, with certain kind of consideration, philosophical consideration. So they give it some kind of philosophical importance. For them, the idea of the certain mental events occurring inside our mind, the idea of consciousness, also apart from that. So all these all this talk of mental states should be considered seriously, and if possible we should try and come up with theories which would explain that in terms which for which we could have a consistent explanation, and if possible some empirical evidence as well. So, but now the theory that we want to discuss today is a unique kind of an approach to the issue under physicalism, and is in a certain way radical in its approach. Because, as the term itself suggests, eliminative physicalism, or also eliminative materialism, as it's called, is basically an idea that mental events or mental states that we think are undeniably there, because they are probably, some of the things that are most immediately available to us whenever we see inside us, whenever we reflect. We know that we know what kind of mental state we are in. We cannot certainly be mistaken about them. There is no way of being under illusion about them. These cases cannot be erroneous under any circumstances. If you're feeling pain, then you're feeling pain. It cannot be the case that you actually don't know, but you only think you are in pain, but actually you're not in pain. Pain, is something that is immediately known. So that big sort of immediately kind of there is hardly any space between consciousness and the pain of it. So to be in pain means to be conscious of it as well. So in that sense, we have very strong reasons to believe that mental states are important to us, and they do exist. But eliminative materialism is a radical take on the issue, and philosophers who side with this theory want to propose that what we have been calling mental states actually do not exist. And then the main idea here is that everything that we talk about does not have to exist. If we're talking about something, and at times we may be meaningfully talking about something, but that does not commit us in any way to its ontology. It doesn't commit us to its ontological aspect. So the idea here is that it's true that we talk about mental states. We have many reasons to believe that we cannot be mistaken about our mental states. Mental states are absolutely immediately available to us, and it's just an important part of our lives. So there is hardly any reason for us to believe that mental states may not exist. We're talking about it all the time. We're experiencing them all the time. So there is no way we could be mistaken about them. It can never be the case that they actually do not exist. But surprising or shocking rather as it may be for us, but eliminative materialist would say that that actually is the case, in the sense that these states actually do not exist, and if we talk about them, it doesn't mean that they have to exist. We talk about several things, and later on it was discovered that none of those things ever existed. Similarly, if we believe in something, like we have a firm belief that mental states do exist, and a lot of our conversation would be rendered meaningless if we remove the different kind of conversations about mental states from the domain of common discourses, common interactions that we have with each other. But then again, the question is that if we talk about something, it doesn't mean it has to exist. Similarly, if we seem to experience something, that also doesn't mean that it has to exist. So we will have a close look at some of the arguments which are directed, which some of the arguments which sort of seem to work like this. So, first of all, let's look at what exactly is the idea behind eliminative materialism, and I quote from Blackwell Dictionary of Philosophy. Eliminative materialism, also called the disappearance theory of mind or eliminativism, the view that our standard mental concepts such as belief and desire are inappropriate for a serious scientific account of human beings. Our talk about propositional attitudes is misleading and should or will be eliminated. The mental phenomena to which these concepts are supposed to refer do not exist. Folk psychology, which employs these mental concepts, does not have the status of a serious theory. Instead, we must use the language of physics and neurophysiology to replace these notions. The leading advocates of this controversial theory include Paul Churchland, Patricia Churchland, Richard Rorty, and Stephen Strick. Eliminative materialism should be distinguished from the identity theory of mind, which believes in the existence of mental phenomena but insists that they are contingently identical with neurophysical states. So, as evident from this kind of definition, as given in Blackwell Dictionary of Philosophy, the basic idea here is that there are certain ways of, there are certain ways of thinking about our mind that is generally termed as folk psychology. Folk psychology, as defined here, are a set of mental concepts which we generally employ. These are, some of the common ways we think about our mind and different kind of, states of consciousness that we generally associate with mind. So the main idea here is that our general ways of thinking about mind, which is broadly termed as folk psychology, could be proven wrong. But for it to be proved wrong, we'll have to somehow formulate these general ways of looking at things as if those were some kind of philosophical claims, as if that amounted to some kind of philosophical theorization of our general ways of talking about mind. So one core issue here is that eliminative physicalists or eliminative materialists want to attack what they call folk psychology, and folk psychology as sort of defined by one of the prominent thinkers, Wilfrid Sellars. So folk psychology is generally sort of viewed as general ways, commonsensical ways of talking about mental events, the general kind of belief patterns we have about our mental space, about different mental entities, and so on and so forth. So now the core issue is, if you were to argue against them, against such kind of a belief, such kind of a system of belief rather, then you'll have to have a kind of proper theorization of these general ways of looking at things. So it has to be placed before us as certain kind of theorization, as a certain kind of theory, as certain kind of philosophical claims which could be refuted. So if those were generally sort of general descriptions of how the things are, general kind of presumptions that we carry all the time with us, or something that we sort of that we believe is so immediate that it doesn't require any argument at all. So if those were the case, if we look at our common ways of thinking like this, then it'll become difficult to argue against them. So first of all, we'll have to present the other view as if it were a theory. And this is precisely what materialists first of all claim, that folk psychology, as a matter of fact, is a theory, because when we form certain kind of common beliefs about mental entities, about general ways of thinking, then it has the same nature, philosophical nature, as as different other kind of theories have. And once it's proposed as a theory, then it becomes easy for philosophers, easy for somebody to have arguments against that kind of a theory. So eliminative materialists have said, in effect, that our talk about the propositional attitudes is indeed just talk, but have then gone on to say that it is not only dispensable, but should be dispensed with as soon as possible. So, general idea here is that we have certain propositions, things appear to us in a certain way, then we formulate into propositions like grass is green, this tree is tall, and so on and so forth, sky is blue, and so on and so forth. But these propositions, descriptive of things as they are, we bear some kind of a mental relationship with these propositions, and this is what you call propositional attitude. So, grass is green, say for example, if we take this proposition, there are several ways of mentally relating to this proposition. Say for example, somebody could say, well, I believe that the grass is green. So the way I relate to that proposition is by the way of belief, which is considered to be of the nature of mind. So what I may say, I desire the grass to be green, and so on and so forth. Again, desiring is something that is attributed to mind. So propositional attitudes is something which forms a very, very important part of our common conversations. And eliminative materialists believe that it is a mere fiction. It's just a talk, and it should be dispensed with, because if we talk like this, if we believe things to be so and so, if this is how we go about things, it does not mean we very soon start thinking that there is some kind of a reality in it, and we take it as a given. We take it as some kind of an axiom from which we draw further conclusion. So eliminative materialists think that this is precisely where the problem lies. Since we talk about mental states like this, since we do have propositional attitudes, and these propositional attitudes are taken seriously, and therefore we are driven in the direction of trying to find some kind of physical account of them. So now eliminative physicalists want to present arguments which would prove that what we call propositional attitudes, things like belief, desire, and so on and so forth, even though in our ordinary conversations they do seem meaningful and they do seem philosophically important in a certain way, but they are fictitious. These things do not exist. So now, having understood that, let's look at what else eliminative materialists are claiming. So behaviorists identify mental states with behavioral dispositions, identity theorists identify mental states with types of brain states, and functionalists identify them with functional states that are physically realized. But all of them believe that all talk about mental states is a meaningful talk, and it must be accounted for in terms of their physical counterpart as a part of different variants of physicalism. Eliminative materialists, taking a radical step, suggest that no purpose is solved by identifying mental states with physical states, because doing that is tantamount to account for fiction in terms of reality. We must realize that all such attempts are going to ultimately result in failures, because whereas reality is defined in terms of what actually is, fiction by definition is something that we seem to understand but is not. Eliminative physicalist thesis rests on the proposal that we should learn to appreciate that mental states are fiction and are not there, even though talking about them seems to make sense. Given that to be the case, we must understand that mental states unnecessarily crowd up universe of philosophical discourse. So basically, the idea here is what is called principle of parsimony in philosophy. So if there are fictitious identities, fictitious things that we often take into consideration, then it's better to do without them, because otherwise they unnecessarily sort of exist, and unnecessarily engage us, given the fact that they don't exist. So it's better to have simpler explanation for things. So this is what eliminative materialists think would be achieved if we have reasons to do away with any conversations about our mental states. Then we better do that. So, because that would reduce some kind of philosophical burden on ontology. So now, further to that, it said, our ontology is the catalogue of all the things we believe actually exist in the universe. To eliminate something from our ontology is therefore to deny its existence. By way of illustration, eliminative materialists often point to historically successful cases of elimination, such as concept of caloric. So this is one example that is popular amongst eliminative materialists. Caloric was a view according to which heat was more of some kind of a substance, some kind of a liquid, or some kind of a substance which existed in almost everything on Earth, and when heated, it would kind of start showing up. So and it was capable of getting transferred from one object to the other. So if one object has more caloric, more substance, namely caloric, and there is another one placed side by side in a physical contact, which has less of it, then just like water flows from higher pressure to lower pressure, so similarly this substance named caloric would move from the region of higher density to the region of lower density. So that was the general idea about heat in earlier times. Other examples could be phlogiston. It was supposed that there's some kind of a substance. This is how sort of people at some point of time accounted for fire. So as if it were a substance that existed in things. Similarly, geocentric view. At one point of time, it was believed that Earth is the center of the universe, and as a matter of fact, there are different kind of spheres, concentric spheres that are sort of presented around us. So the entire universe was viewed in terms of these spheres, the center of which was Earth. So, and witchcraft, of course, So there are several things, which we thought at some point of time existed, but it was proved later on that there is nothing like those things that existed ever. Those were generally our, ways of accounting for certain facts. So those were just the suppositions, and it turned out that those suppositions were not true. So similarly, an eliminative materialist would say, well, all talk about mental states is basically similar to that. We believe certain things, but neuroscientists would very soon prove that none of those things like brain, like mental states and etc. Exist at all. So friends, we'll continue with our discussion on eliminative materialism. We'll return after a short break. Thank you. Hello viewers, welcome back. So we were talking about eliminative materialism, and we saw how eliminative materialists believe that mental states, or what we call propositional attitudes, we seem to believe that those become possible only in terms only when we consider them in terms of some kind of mental events. But then eliminative materialists point out that there were several things which we earlier believed in, several entities, but which later on turned out to be complete fictions, though we at some point in time firmly believed that those things existed. So things that we believe do exist, at some later point we could always there's always a possibility of demonstrating that something we thought existed in terms of explanation as well actually does not exist at all. So trying to understand that further, when we replace some of the entities in our earlier ontology with new ontology and understanding of things, it does result in shock and awe among the majority. But if there is no necessary reason for the witches to exist, if we cannot prove them to exist, then we should better do without them rather than letting them be without any reason. We should simply give up such supposed entities altogether. So basically the idea here is that how much ever firmly we may believe certain things to exist, how much ever certain beliefs be dear to us, but if according to some new findings, there is no place for those, according to some new explanations with better empirical evidence. If those new explanations do not have any place for earlier, for some of the entities which were supposed in some of the earlier explanations, then we should rather give up, those entities which were presupposed in the earlier explanation, and that happens to be that is very often the case in the history of science, as we have already seen. So when it was discovered that heat should be defined in terms of the kinetic energy of the molecules of a given substance, what did we do with our idea of caloric? Did we think it necessary to now find a counterpart of caloric in kinetic energy of molecules? In other words, did scientists reduce caloric to kinetic energy of molecules? The answer is that caloric was not equivocated or reduced to molecular kinetic energy. It was realized that caloric simply does not exist. and therefore we should stop talking about it. Any talk of caloric was based on the presupposition that heat is itself a substance or thing that travels through and in and out of object into other things. When it was proved and realized later on empirical grounds that heating up or cooling down of an object simply means and corresponds to the change in the energy level of the object's molecules, we simply stopped believing that heat is a substance, and with that model, caloric was also given up or eliminated from our ontology and universe of discourse. So this is how we find this is what we find generally in history of science to be happening. There are certain explanations which become possible only under certain presuppositions, and those presuppositions also include existence, beliefs regarding suppositions regarding existence of some molecule, some substance, and so on and so forth. And later on, if newer explanations, better explanations with more of empirical evidence, with more logical consistency, if it is discovered that those explanations are not compatible with earlier theorizations, which were founded upon beliefs in existence of some entities, then we should rather give up those beliefs, and this is what happens all the time, like in the case of caloric. We simply gave up that idea. Similarly, phlogiston, that idea was inconsistent, it was incompatible with certain other evidences that were discovered later on, and therefore the idea of phlogiston was entirely given up. Eliminative materialists, among whom the name of Paul Churchland and Patricia Churchland is prominent, they think that mental states are part of a primitive theory of human behavior called folk psychology. So Paul and Patricia Churchland, who are one of the greatest upholders of eliminative materialism, they think that mental states are part of a primitive theory of human behavior called folk psychology. That is, our common sense psychological framework according to which human beings have mental states like beliefs, desires, and sensations, is literally a theory that we all use to predict and explain one another's behavior. The difference between folk psychology and other theories is that folk psychology is adopted by ordinary people rather than by scientists and is learned as we grow up. As such, we tend not to think of it as a theory. Since it has become such an integral and seemingly natural part of our way of dealing with one another, we overlook its theoretical status. So the main idea here is that when we are talking about mental states like beliefs, desires, and sensation, and so on, we are using a kind of a theoretical framework. We may not be aware of it, but as a matter of fact, as Paul and Patricia Churchland point out, as a matter of fact, we are using some kind of a theoretical framework through which we try to make sense of the behavior of a person, what a person is doing, and so on and so forth. So since we don't want to believe that whatever a person is doing is that there is no reason behind it, since we don't want to believe that, we want to believe that the other person is in charge of what is doing or she is doing, and there are some kind of mental states associated with those actions. There's certain kind of reasoning in the mind which is associated with those actions. And that being the case, it seems very natural for us to believe that there are certain mental states like beliefs, desires, and sensations, and so on. The reason why we don't think of it as a theory is because we have internalized these ways of thinking so much. They have become so much a part of our total theoretical framework, which we generally sort of use implicitly whenever we try to theorize about a person's behavior and so on. We have so much internalized it that it never occurs to us that all our perceptions, which even seem to be immediate to us, could be theory laden. So the main idea here is that everything, sort of all perceptions, any understanding of things that we form, how much ever immediate it may seem to us, it is in a certain way, in some sense, theory laden. And as philosophers, especially if one is eliminative materialist, the idea here is to present an explicit account of some of these beliefs, some of this sort of theoretical framework that we are using all the time, but implicitly. That is always implicit, in our ways of looking at things. So if we kind of explicate that theoretical framework and prove that this theoretical framework is not very sound, and given some of the some empirical evidences that we have before us, it does not have much of a ground. This theoretical framework that we grow up with does not have much of a ground anymore, given some of the evidences suggested by us, from the other side. And therefore, since there is not enough ground, we should rather, give up this theoretical framework. So, idea here is that eliminative materialists are typically inclined to make 4 distinct claims that might be formulated as follows. So, these are the 4 main sort of claims that eliminative materialists make. Belief, desire, and other familiar intentional state expressions are among the theoretical terms of a common sense theory of the mind. This theory is often called folk psychology. Second, folk psychology is a seriously mistaken theory. Many of the claims it makes about the states and processes that give rise to behavior, and many of the presuppositions of those claims are false. And this is the second claim that is made by eliminative materialists. And the third one is a mature science that explains how the mind or brain works and how it produces the behavior we observe, will not refer to the common sense intentional states and processes invoked by folk psychology. Beliefs, desires, and the rest will not be part of the ontology of a mature scientific psychology. Fourth is that intentional states of common sense psychology do not exist. So, this is how eliminative materialism makes its point, and this is quoting from Stephen Stick from his book Deconstructing the Mind, which he published in 1998. So this is how eliminative materialist makes her point. That there is something called folk psychology, a common set of beliefs that we always employ when we are perceiving things, and so on and so forth. So that provides a general theoretical framework which influences us in inevitable ways when we are thinking about things, and it is false. So first of all, we need to be clear about what do we mean when we say that folk psychology or common sense ways of looking at things is actually a theory. So, psychology generally refers to the study of the ways we form beliefs and mental states. Folk psychology, along the same line, refers to the common sense ways people think about mind and its various states. Eliminativists state further that folk psychology also provides us with an explanatory framework, since it allows us to predict and explain human behavior. Our usual method of explaining the behavior of human beings is by identifying their mental states. We talk about what they believe, desire, or how they felt at a time they acted, and doing so seems to explain their actions admirably. So basically, the idea here is that why do we formulate scientific theories? Because we have some kind of empirical evidence for them. We want to be able to explain certain things with the help of them, and also we want to be able to make successful predictions based on those theories. And if those theories are found to be unfalling, then we think that those are not only theories but actually laws. So this is what is generally supposed to be the nature of what we call theoretical framework, or this is what this is how we think about different theories. So now, does folk psychology perform these jobs as well, namely that of explaining human behavior and predicting human behavior? If it is doing explaining and predicting of human behavior, then we could say, well, folk psychology is a theory, because this is what theories are supposed to do. So then folk psychology will be proved is a theory. So theories, including scientific ones, also do the same job. That is they do the job of predicting and explaining things. So psychology generally refers to the study of the ways we form beliefs and mental states. Folk psychology, along the same line, refers to the common sense ways people think about mind and its various states. So theories, including scientific ones, also do the same job, like prediction and explaining. For example, the theory of gravitation provides us with an explanation of different heavenly bodies and allows us to predict its location over a long period of time. So this is what theories do. They allow us to make successful predictions. Similarly, folk psychology also allows us to make predictions about human behavior. For example, saying that I wanted to avoid dust coming into the room from outside is usually a reasonably good explanation for why I close the door and windows of the room. So if somebody we find is sort of if it's a windy day and somebody we find is closing the doors and windows, one could say, well, the reason behind that is probably the person may be allergic to dust. Or say, for example, if walking down the road, I suddenly start blinking my eyes very fast. So how to understand this behavior? One would suppose, well, some dust might have entered into my eyes, or maybe some very, very small mosquito or something might have entered into my eyes, and this is what we generally do when such instances occur. We start blinking our eyes very fast. So folk psychology allows us to explain human behavior in these ways. We do believe that if somebody is blinking her eyes very fast, we believe that that person is in a mental state of unease. The person is feeling some kind of a pain, some unease in her mind, and this is the reason why she is doing that. So there is some kind of a mental state that is associated with that behavior, and this is how we are able to understand a particular behavior, and this is how we also generally explain it. So if we come across somebody who's doing this, blinking of eyes, we can always say, well, we can always tell the other person it's just happening because this person must have some dust or some other kind of particle must have fallen inside the eyes of this person. So similarly, so this is how we use it for explaining and understanding certain behaviors. Similarly, just like theories not only explain but do the predictions as well. So similarly, through our common sense beliefs about mental states and all, we are able to make successful predictions also. So if we know that somebody has some kind of unease, or somebody is feeling some kind of a pain, then we can very well predict that person is going to sort of behave in a certain manner which is associated with pain. Say, for example, that person is going to say, "Ouch, it's hurting. Ouch, it's paining here," and so on and so forth. So folk psychology not only allows us to explain and understand things, it allows us to make predictions as well. So another example could be if somebody knows that I'm allergic to dust and there is dust around, one could make a good prediction that I will close the doors and windows if it is windy outside. Thus, it is not implausible to believe that folk psychology actually does work like a theory. A theory is supposed to perform two jobs. It helps us understand, a given occurrence, behavior in the present, scenario, and it must allow us to make predictions about that as well. And our common our common ways of looking at things, what we call folk psychology, seems to perform both these functions. Therefore, eliminative physicalists argue that we have good reasons to believe that folk psychology is, as a matter of fact, a theory. So now, apart from being able to make predictions and being able to sort of give good explanations of human behavior, there are other things as well. There are other similarities as well that folk psychology shares. With other theories. So now to read from Neil Campbell's book titled A Brief Introduction to Philosophy of Mind, he says, Neil Campbell says, aside from these rather general similarities, there are two other grounds for thinking folk psychology is a theory. First, there is a reason to believe that mental states are theoretical entities that get their meaning in the same way as the entities posited by any theory. Consider atomic theory. It consists of a set of laws that specify a set of relations between various entities and observable facts. For instance, it postulates such things as protons, neutrons, and electrons, and states how these things are related to one another. In order to understand the terms proton, neutron, electron, we need to understand the terms. We need to understand the role of these concepts within atomic theory. That is, unless one has some understanding of the theory as a whole and of the relationship between protons, neutrons, and electrons, one cannot really understand what these words mean. Such terms, then, are implicitly defined by the network of principles and relations in which they figure. One of the most outspoken eliminative materialists, Paul Churchland, calls this the network theory of meaning, and claims that all theoretical entities derive their meaning in this way. So basic idea here is that whenever we are trying to look for certain explanations like in atomic theory, we have to, we'll have something, makes sense in a whole network of presuppositions. So, say for example, in atomic theory, we believe that there are three, main subatomic particles, namely proton, neutron, electrons. And since, we are formulating a certain kind of a theoretical framework, we'll have to, the neutron would make sense to us, the idea of nucleus in the atom would make sense to us only when we understand the idea of electron. Electron would make sense to us only if we, understand the idea of nucleus as a whole. So something becomes meaningful in a whole network of other entities, and they mutually contribute meaning to each other. So something starts making sense only within what Paul Churchland calls the network theory of meaning. And he believes that all theoretical entities, which includes, of course, mental states as well, which is his main target, he believes that all theoretical entities, including mental entities, derive their meaning in this way. So now, next to that, Churchland, says something more apart from that. So now to read again from the same book. According to Churchland, the network theory of meaning is also true of our mental vocabulary. Mental terms like belief, desire, and sensation, and so on, derive their meanings in the same way as words like proton. To see this, we need first to recognize that folk psychology is in large part constituted by a set of generalizations that function much like the laws of other theories. If people desire X and it is within their ability to achieve X, they will do what they believe is necessary to achieve X. On Churchland's view, the place of beliefs, desires, and other mental concepts within generalizations of this sort constitutes our understanding of these concepts. For instance, in order to understand what a belief is, one needs to understand its relationship to intentional actions and its relationship to other mental states like desire, knowledge, doubt, and so on. Since our mental terms are defined by the network theory of meaning, and since this is how all theoretical terms are defined, our mental terms are probably theoretical terms. So his idea is, as I stated earlier, that things make sense only as some kind of interrelationship between different kind of theoretical entities, and all these conditions seem to be fulfilled by entities that form a part of folk psychology, and this is how in terms of a certain kind of theoretical framework, we formulate certain laws like the one stated here. If people desire X and it is within their ability to achieve X, they will do whatever they believe is necessary to achieve X. So such kind of general formulations which are necessary, which provide us in a certain way premises for certain kind of arguments to draw conclusion from them, certain kind of generalizations, law-like generalizations, become possible within the ambit of folk psychology. And that's one of the main reasons why, according to Paul Churchland, folk psychology should be considered as a theory. So friends, this is all we have time for today. We'll continue our discussion on eliminative physicalism in our next lecture. Thank you.
Dear friends, on that note, we would like to thank Dr. Verma for coming to our show and delivering this wonderful lecture. And thank you, dear friends, for watching our lecture. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.